Duo Moreno and Banda Bellini, and the banda's full name is Banda Musicale Italiana Vincenzo Bellini, are two community musical institutions that are widely and nostalgically known to the older generation of Italian migrants in Melbourne. Duo Moreno's modern pan-Italian and Italian-Latin sound greatly enriched the first generation Italian social life in Australia for several decades from the late 50s. Their polished, rhythmically exciting and exotic Latin-Italian sound caught the late 1960s Anglo-Australian wave of popularity for Latin music and continental-style entertainment, and therefore also contributed greatly a much-needed cultural bridge between Anglo-Australians and Italian-Australian entertainment seekers. And you'll see their records arrayed below the screen there. Banda Bellini, on the other hand, is the only Italian brass and reeds concert band in Melbourne and the largest such band in Australia. Since its formation in the 70s, the banda and its music have remained significant to mostly older Italian migrants as a persistent element of many of the traditional patron saints' feste that are held in Melbourne and beyond, as well as for their community concerts of Italian operatic and other music. In the paper, we argue that these two music groups have occupied different social and cultural spaces within the life of the post-war Italian community in response to specific times and shifting cultural needs and social formations in the post-migration process. At a time when the community was still fragmented by regional ties, we contend that both institutions have been important to the construction of a pan-Italian community identity in Melbourne by catering to all regional Italian groupings, playing substantially pan-Italian music and being marked by other recognisable pan-Italian characteristics. Today, in a 21st century transcultural Italian-Australian community environment with its still evolving cultural identity as it moves into the third generation, the Duo Moreno and other reputed post-war era Italian entertainers continue to occupy a nostalgic space through their recordings, which are also being rediscovered by a broader audience for retro pop. They also form part of a broader collective nostalgic remembering and memorialising of a past era in which Italian Australians had to work so very hard to become established and somehow fit into the Australian society they'd chosen to become part of. On the other hand, the still active Banda Bellini occupies a living transcultural space through its ongoing endeavours to adapt its membership and musical direction and remain viable within its changing multicultural and Italian community contexts in Melbourne. So first I'm going to talk about the Banda Bellini, and then John will speak about Duo Moreno, and we hopefully have time, he will have time to play, might as well sit down, play a bit of music. So the Banda Bellini is, as I said, it's an amateur brass and woodwind concert band of around 30 musicians formed within the community here in 1971. It belongs to a band tradition dating back to 19th century Italy that remains strong in those parts of Italy, especially the rural south, where most post-war Melbourne migrants came from. Many of the banda's original musicians played in their hometown banda in Italy before migrating to Australia. And all except its youngest members carry memories of the banda as a local musical institution bound up with the cultural and religious life of their villages or towns. After nearly 2 decades of post-war Italian migration, the Italian population of Melbourne was sufficiently strong numerically to support the establishment of its own banda, and financially and socially established enough to begin forming community institutions, such as regional associations and clubs, and also to re-establish their religious and cultural traditions, which included the feste, celebrating the patron saints of individual towns from which Italians have migrated from, and in which the banda plays an important role. Oh, thanks. Of course. Thank you very much.
I'll take this away.
While these feste demonstrated, I'm going to put it here rather than on the microphone, demonstrated highly localised regional ties to the Paese, as they still do today, The banda's repertoire, both for feste as well as for community and other concerts, has always been distinctly pan-Italian, consisting mostly of Italian marches, light classical pieces, and transcriptions for concert band from Italian opera, as well as some Neapolitan and other Italian popular songs. The significance of opera for the banda is underlined by its title, Bellini, in the band's name. With its pan-Italian operatic and other repertoire, the banda was able to cater to the whole community, regardless of regional ties or the particular regional institutional needs that it fulfilled, making it transferable between regionally specific feste, and also providing a bridge between Italians' regional and national identities. My research on the Banda Bellini has been conducted at 3 different times, firstly in 1998 and then subsequently in the mid-2000s and just recently, supplemented by historical research, and it shows continuities and changes over that period, as well as the banda's earlier decades. The continuing core role of the banda is in patron saints feste, as you can see in these photos taken over 20 years. The history of the patron saint feste in Australia shows a remarkable exponential expansion in their number, from a gradual increase through the 70s and 80s to an explosion of festa activity in the 1990s and 2000s. It doesn't appear to have dwindled particularly much in the decades since. In 2005 to 6, there were around, I calculated, 45 festa were held in Melbourne to celebrate the patron saints of particular Italian towns and regions, with over half of them including the Banda Bellini. So you can see the banda in the background in all of those, playing in the procession, and occasionally a non-Italian band if it wasn't available. The demand for a banda in feste, especially their own Italian banda, remains strong, although fewer of them can now afford to hire it, I have to say. Besides playing in the actual procession behind the statue of the saint and sometimes in the church, many feste include a mini concert by the banda as part of the following secular entertainment. 2 examples. You can see in the top one in 1998, then conductor Enzo Marciano turning around to conduct the audience who were singing along spontaneously to the banda's operatic chorus. But continuing to the present, the banda has a dual identity. On the one hand, as something like a folk band, in the sense that it has an almost ritual role as part of a vernacular pre-modern village tradition, and on the other as a more serious, almost symphonic type community ensemble that has social and musical aspirations as art music and thereby carries some cultural capital. It takes this guise in the regular large-scale concerts that the banda presents. For example, this gala concert at Melrose Reception Centre in Tullamarine in the northern suburbs in 2005. Or a big Christmas concert, Presepio Musicale, in a church in Bulleen last December. That's the repertoire that was for the Bulleen concert. You can see that's Italian emphasis, and that they were the marches that were played in a festa in Mooney Ponds. I showed you a photograph of that. Usually, the concerts, not the festa processions, or concerts, usually they give an added cultural gloss by the inclusion of professional opera singers who sing the operatic arias or duets to the delight of the audience. Now, I'll give you a little taste. Look-alike, Angelo Falcone, star actor.
Onnipotente
And so the audience start clapping along, and then there's a lot of bravos at the end. Continuing to the present, Banda has, I've done that. So today, well into the 21st century, how does such a band maintain both relevance and viability? And what sort of meanings does and can it project within an evolving Italian community environment impacted by generational and transcultural change and encompassing diverse and shifting identities? Does it simply represent something retained from the past, or can it capture in any way present-day trends or future aspirations within a changing community? So I've already discussed its dual roles, and I just want to briefly say something about membership and musical direction. As an amateur band with a largely elderly male Italian musicianship of mostly untrained musicians, one of the band's challenges is to achieve a musical standard that complements its emblematic community role beyond the festa and also attract new younger members. It includes a small flow of young second or third generation Italian-Australian musicians trained in school bands, though they don't have the ongoing commitment of the older players. But significantly, it also includes some non-Italian musicians from other ethnic groups, including Maltese, Greek, German, Hungarian and Russian musicians, and a young Brazilian trumpeters recently joined, which points towards a future for the band as perhaps one with a multi-ethnic, pan-European profile that draws in experience of other European wind band traditions. Particular interest is a membership crossover with the Maltese Melita band, despite very different musical aesthetics. Lastly, of the banda's succession of conductors, the two most recent conductors have made an effort in different ways and for somewhat different reasons to renew the repertoire, giving it a stronger, more Italian focus and shifting it away somewhat from light classical continental European repertoire, just at a time when the community itself is arguably becoming less Italian in some respects. However, this agenda has clashed somewhat with banda culture in excising non-Italian pieces that are much loved by the musicians, such as the Strauss-Radetzky March or Villiers from the Merry Widow, some of whom have actually left out of protest. The current conductor, a young, recently arrived Italian, Giuliano Di Ieno, is attempting to bridge this cultural gap by consulting musicians about new pieces, such as arrangements of music by the widely known and loved Italian composer Ennio Morricone, and the equally widely known and loved songwriter Domenico Modugno, which he hopes will also attract new younger members. Indispensable also to the banda's viability and relevance is its indefatigably energetic president for over 25 years, Frank Di Blasi, who is assiduous in promoting the band, raising sponsorship and organising performances. And I don't think there's any Coazet people here, but they all know him very well. In terms of membership and repertoire, if not context, however, it remains to be seen whether the Banda Bellini into the future will be an Italian band or a band with an Italian musical identity, that is, that just plays Italian music. And over to John now. But don't cut him short just because I've taken longer.
Not a lot of theory from
I
me.
better stick around for the slides.
Gio Moreno was the title of two very talented brothers from Rome. Cesare and Alessandro Scartozzi chose for their act as teenagers and continued to be identified with in Australia. However, I always like to think of Duo Moreno as a sort of metaphor for all of the very talented Italian Australian bands and artists that enrich post-war Melbourne Italian community life during what could be called the great era of Italian Australian cabaret bands and artists, often called Latin Italian bands. This dynamic and expanding pan-Italian band and venue scene covered the period mid-1950s to say mid-1970s, but it contracted somewhat with, among other factors, the eventual shift of community entertainment towards purpose-built Italian regional clubs with tight budgetary entertainment managers with their own ideas about what music is good for the community, including disco. The story of Duo Moreno begins with the late 1950 show business success of Cesare and Sandro as a remarkably versatile teenage vocal and multi-instrumental act in Rome, and thereon to a tour of Italy and appearance on the famous Rai television variety show that made them a household name overnight. In 1959, the Italian airline entrepreneur Reg Anzac contracted them to perform at his Queensland tropical island resort, Hayman Island. And this was the beginning of an Australian musical adventure that would provide unforgettable entertainment experience to countless island guests through the exotic Hawaiian, Latin and other costume theme nights they presented. During their several years association with Hayman Island, they toured the Federal Hotel circuit, made high-profile television variety show appearances on contract to Channel 9, recorded several well-selling LPs for the Escalator, which are down there, and appeared at Melbourne's huge and iconic entertainment venue, Festival Hall, as Latin American specialists. From the early 1960s, they quickly became established in a rapidly expanding Melbourne Italian nightclub, variety show and cabaret ball scene, and that's where I came into contact with people playing in those clubs at that time. And became resident musicians and artists at Melbourne's premier Italian restaurant and night spot Mario's, backing international floor show artists and presenting their own exciting floor show act. Their Duo Moreno quartet and later Duo Moreno combo became a much sought after entity in the ever expanding Italian-Australian entertainment scene, and a game of residency at another especially prestigious venue, La Chateau in Albert Park. They had by this time also begun their long association with W&G Recording Studios in South Melbourne. That was to result in a remarkable output of singles and LPs. Around 15 LPs, I've got 13, I think, of the 15 so far. Cesare and Sandro further increased their personal artistic standing as winning entrants in the annual Melbourne Italian Festival of Song, featuring their own song compositions. But probably the most remembered contribution to the Melbourne Italian entertainment scene was through the magnificent venue they personally designed and hand-built on 15 acres of land near the foot of Mount Dandenong called Villa Borghese. A restaurant and reception centre for 300 guests with regular Sunday smorgasbord, mixed the concrete themselves, they did everything. Live entertainment by Duo Moreno Combo and others. It was opened by 1970 and quickly became a much-loved institution for Italians, other continental European migrants and adventurous Anglo-Australians. You only have to mention the name Villa Borghese or Duo Moreno in a group of older generation Italian Australians or others, and someone will say, oh, we were married there, or we really loved going to the Sunday cabaret smorgasbords and dancing to the music. But despite its success, the brothers sold Villa Borghese in 1984, and Sandro and Cesare drifted away from the music as other hospitality projects and problems distracted their attention. Villa Borghese is no more. Sandro died all too young in the late 1990s, and Cesare, whom I spoke to a few days ago, has been totally absorbed by business, travel, family since then. Today, the legacy of Duo Moreno resides mainly in the recordings and the nostalgic memories of those who experienced the great era of Italian Australian cabaret bands and artists. But there have been some past and more recent efforts to recapture the musical and social magic of that dynamic era. The Macambo Cabaret Balls, hosted by accordionist Ugo Ceresoli, leader of Orchestra Macambo, were a major social institution in Melbourne Italian Australian entertainment of the first decade of this era. Compachita Hall, not far from here, so the hall's still there, and that's where they had their cabarets every Sunday for many, many years. Now, during the 1980s, Ugo ran a series of Macambo nostalgia reunion cabaret balls at the iconic San Remo ballroom that had hosted so many balli italiani in the great era, to try and reproduce this musical and social magic. Another leading band that appeared more towards the end of the era, Sergio G and the Flippers, recently ran several annual large-scale Sergio G nostalgia cabaret nights at the same venue, and released a Nostalgia Sergio G CD and a YouTube to commemorate the era. Franco Cambereri, who was a keyboard player and arranger for the very popular trio Franco of the era, a synthesizer composed and released hundreds of marvellous tracks of Latin inflected and other music on the Italian-Australian groovy music label. Evocative, reflecting upon the type of Italian and continental popular music his band played in Melbourne cabarets, clubs, and the 1960s Melbourne TV variety show Carosello, we heard about this morning. He was a stage man for Carosello. They did sketches and everything. Various other Melbourne Italian bands and artists recorded during the Great Era, including Trio Franco. However, the Duo Moreno and Duo Moreno combo's recorded output of Italian and other pan-Italian popular music dwarfs that of all other Melbourne bands and artists, and their output spanned the entire era. Their success as recording artists came partly through their ability to obtain recordings of the winning songs of the annual San Remo Song Festival in Italy immediately after the contest, and release their own singles of these songs for the Italian-Australian market before anybody else. But more important factors were the richly distinctive sound of Cesare's solo vocals, the inimitable blending of their sibling voices, their multi-instrumental talent and their stylistic versatility, their exceptional charm, their professionalism, and especially the very talented musicians they chose to work with. Another particularly important reason for their success was their expertise in Afro-Cuban dance rhythms, instruments and mambo band vocalising, and in particular their grasp of the Afro-Cuban so-called clave rhythmic principle that enables expert Hispanic performers to play with the beat before and after the beat, which you're probably familiar with that. They reached Australia only months before the arrival of the cha-cha-cha dancing craze, and probably remain the most accomplished instrumental and vocal performers of mambo, cha-cha-cha and other tropical Latin music throughout the whole era. Hearing this record would immediately transport so many elderly Italian Australians back to the 1960s, when the cha-cha-cha, mambo and other Latin rhythms was an exciting and invigorating soundtrack to their hard but fulfilling lives as they danced, courted and created a family, a home and a community in their new country. Very briefly in conclusion, Duo Moreno and Banda Bellini present highly contrasting but also complementary forms of pan-Italian music directed at an Italian-Australian community in successive periods and fulfilling diverse needs. Whereas Duo Moreno's legacy is a disembodied one through their recordings, which are now also being rediscovered as Australian rather than just Italian-Australian music, and as part of Australian popular music history. Banda Bellini is a living and dynamic legacy as it seeks to find a meaningful role for the future.
And just play these, attempt to play.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, if you click on
That's
that.
it, that's it.
Ah.
Yep, zip, zip, zip.
Oh,
Do you want me to
so
go
On the
tricky.
speaker again.
Here we go.
Alison.
If you go on the speaker icon again, I think
Oh.
Yes,
There
and
we
then
go.
next
on
the
song.
play
Yeah, no,
arrow.
oh, the other one. I don't know. We'll start with this one.
This is a Peppino Decree cover, straight after San Remo.
Stanotte dormire tranquillamente e domattina tutto cambierà. La vita che sembrava ormai finita, al tuo risveglio ti sorriderà. Alla tua età l'amore un cuccioletto che vuole solo giocare col tuo cuore. Ascolta che dicono le stelle, finché lo vuole lascialo giocare, finché lo vuole lascialo. Alla costa azul yo me sentiré feliz por su cielo, por su mar, por su arena, por su sol. Siete pure, Aline, siete pure, dai.
Okay.